The dynamic duo, Dana and Dylan, today as Nebraska heads into the second week of spring practice. That's next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins.
All right, welcome everybody. Connor Happer here
Hello.
from 1620 The Zone. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. It is March 31st. March 31st. Today, if you say March 31st out loud, you think, are we sure that day exists? It was the premise of an entire episode of Parks and Rec one time when April Ludgates scheduled all of Ron Swanson's appointments for March 31st without knowing that it was a real date, and then she had to do all the appointments on that day. I oftentimes get confused, but it is a day and we're here.
Yeah, I mean, April 31st. Let's plan a show for that. Let's plan a show for April 31st.
Yeah. Love the big 1 year anniversary party or something like that. Everybody's invited, free beer, all those things. April 31st. Be there.
Hey, speaking of that, we went over 6,000 subscribers on YouTube in the last couple of days. So thank you all for watching us on YouTube and listening, of course, on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere else.
Yeah. So going into week two, seriously, it's greatly appreciated. The growth within a year has been awesome and only up from here. So week two of spring ball is upon us. Nebraska's practiced 4 times, I believe, in the spring. They're set to practice 3 additional times this week. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. We'll get some defense. We'll get a little mix of offensive line, I think, in there as well. But before we hear any of that this week, let's go back to last week with Dana Holgorsen. We talked about him. We didn't get like all of the time in the world to pop that thing open because we had a Friday mailbag show. But Dana's fantastic. He tells it how it is, and he has thoughts on a lot of different things, obviously, including but not limited to what his offense is going to look like in 2025.
Yeah, he mentioned his January kind of at the beginning of his media session on Thursday and talked about coming back into the office and how he was grateful to Matt Rule that Dana didn't have to go out on the road and recruit in the month of January. Nebraska has that big staff now, and the offensive coordinator can stay home and the defensive coordinator can stay home. And I think the special teams coordinator, if they want to do that, can stay home and recruit on campus and work on coordinating those positions. So Dana just dove in to the offense, and I think he mentioned that Rule wanted him there on January 1st. Remember, Nebraska played on December 28th, and Dana was like, "Hey man, just give me like a day." And so, said he came in on January 2nd, and it sounded like it was an early in the morning kind of thing until late at night every day. He said that he believes that he worked harder in that month than at any point in his career. And this is a guy who has worked for, well, I don't know that Mike Leach is necessarily known for being the guy that works the longest hours of any coach out there. The late, great Mike Leach, he was unorthodox in the way that he did things, and that may have included like the time that he got to the office in a day, but he got the most done in the period of time that he was doing it. That's not up for debate. Holgorsen worked for him. He worked for Mike Gundy. He worked for Kevin Sumlin, and then he was a head coach for 13 seasons. So to think that this is as hard as he's worked it speaks to the effort he's putting in. It speaks to something about Matt Rule's program for sure, and it does not deviate from what we have known and heard in the past about the way that Rule runs things as a head coach.
No, he sat behind his, according to Holgorsen, he sat behind his computer screen in his office for a month straight. And just, I don't know what that exactly looked like. I mean, they were probably more digging into that in the next couple of weeks here. Okay, what did that actually look like? And And really I think what we got from what Holgorsen said last week was kind of just fine tuning. I mean, they a lot of what they're going to do, the concepts of like the offense that they run are going to be the same from 2024 to 2025. But what needs to be better? Execution, I think, was probably the thing that he discovered when he came in. Is like, we could do what we're trying to do here. We just have to be better at it. So he tightened things up a little bit, and I think is in the process of highlighting the things that they are able to do offensively. One of those things that we've already discovered so far this spring is the emergence of the running back pass game, not the running backs throwing the football, thank God, but throwing the running backs the football, whether it be in the screen game out of the backfield. And Nebraska got a lot better at that and a lot cleaner at it at the end of last year when Dana Holgorsen took over. And he clearly loves Emmett Johnson in that part of the game. And it makes him, all the stuff that we talk about with Emmett mostly is surrounding the ground game. And, he's only good for X amount of carries or whatever. Well, if he's as dangerous, coming out of the backfield to catch a ball as he was last year, yeah, that absolutely changes, what he's able to give you. Maybe he goes from a 75 to 90 yards per game player to 150 all-purpose yards, and that's a much, much different player. And Holgorsen clearly loves the track that he's on.
Yeah, he says these things about Emmett Johnson, and it makes me kind of take a step back and think about the conversations that we've had about the Nebraska running backs in the last couple of months, because Dana's going into this with a vision of a number one guy who is not just some guy, like not just another guy in the Big Ten. I think Holgorsen views Johnson as being a running back who can rate among the best in the Big Ten. He says he's a different player in 2025 than what Nebraska had in the 4 games that the two of them were together last season. And, we've seen like this, the signs that you're able to see in these off-season months. I think we've seen some of that stuff with Emmett, like the indicators are like pointing in a direction for him to take things to a different level, like the leadership part of it, his physical conditioning, like Emmett Johnson, I think he said something like he's added 8 to 10 pounds of muscle when we heard from him last week. He looks good. He's always been a guy who's in shape, but we probably need to just kind of revisit or reevaluate exactly what Nebraska has in a number one running back. And maybe that changes a little bit of the conversation about the group as a whole. Dana definitely feels that they have something unique or something special in Emmett Johnson.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think a lot of that comes from just the complete package that he is, right? I don't think he does one thing particularly special, but if you're able to ask him to execute a whole bunch of different stuff and he's able to do that, then the yards are going to come for him. So that's no doubt a big deal for Nebraska's offense. 2-minute offense is something that was addressed in the offseason immediately. They took a look back at last year and said, this is something that was a mess, and we have to get better at. Remember, there was a lot of times last year, late game situations, especially about the halfway mark of the year, or probably I guess a little bit earlier than that, and then beyond. Oftentimes those drives to tie the game or to go in and grab a score before half really were dead on arrival. So that was something that they identified, as I'm sure most fans sitting in their chairs at home have identified.
Yeah, it's probably something I put out of my mind a little bit and need a refresher on about the way that the offense worked in 2024. But I think you're right. About the time you got to the Illinois game, and then the Rutgers game before the first half ended, things started to go downhill for Nebraska in the red zone and the two minute drill. So he's redone that. Holgorsen, there continues to be a narrative about Nebraska's offense and how it's not going to change a lot from one year to the next, and I'll withhold judgment on that. I'm not holding my breath in believing it's going to be the same offense. I think they're probably underselling a little bit of the change, but he didn't hold back in saying that they've gone back and looked at everything and really kind of retool the entirety of what they do in 2 minutes. And then there was a moment at the end of Dana's presser where he was talking about yardage, and he was asked about goals that Nebraska has or that he has for the offense this coming season. And let's play this, what he had to say. This was his walk-off moment at the press conference. I don't know if he was dropping the mic, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can kind of see how he leaves at the end of this thing and has a final line for those who are in attendance. Here it is.
Goals for our offense, but it's not how much rushing yards or how much passing yards or any of that. It's more about efficiency, first downs, third down conversions, touchdown in the red zone, things that matter. To me, yardage doesn't matter.
All good.
Yards per play matters.
All right, guys.
You can hear it. There's just a little like in the
Why the
background.
laughter? Why the laughter?
Well, last year, Mark, this is in late October of last year. Marcus Satterfield, Nebraska's offensive coordinator at the time, was asked if he had a goal in terms of yards per play that he'd like to hit. And he was flummoxed. He didn't have an answer to it. And he was like, I don't know, like 4 to 6 sounds pretty good to me. And that is not that's not good, first of all. Also, he didn't really seem to, understand the impact of the statistic. I thought that he was talking about it in terms of like literally how many yards you want to get a play, not what is your yards per play. But anyway, that's why there's a little bit of a kind of groan in the back. It's like, oh, yards per play. We're talking about yards per play here. I don't think he meant anything by it. I don't even think Dana Holgorsen probably knows about that situation, honestly.
It would be unusual if he knew. He's had so much thrown at him here in the 4 or 5 months he's been in Lincoln that it would be strange to think that he would know about some random moment from a press conference with Satterfield back in November. Like there wouldn't be any. I think he was genuine, and I think a lot of coaches feel that way. That yards per play is a big statistic, and that's part of the reason why it was valid for Satterfield to be asked that question. It's a trend in football. It's like the in thing to talk about yards per play or points per play, whatever.
And Holgorsen was just talking about it because the original question that he was asked that got to that point was like, because he had just got done talking about his offenses and how they've evolved over the years, and he let go of the air raid a long time ago. So that question came up. It was like, do you have like a rush yards per game, pass yards per game, like split that you want to have? And he's like, whatever, yards, just give me good yards per play, give me some good efficiency, whatever it takes, that kind of thing. So I don't think anything was pointed in that regard at all.
It does come off very much like if you're just walking into it and not considering the context, like one guy really is on top of things with the way college football works, and his predecessor really was not, as far as it pertains to the things that you need to pay attention to on offense. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to do more of this and talk about what Dylan Raiola had to say, including some comments about his body composition. That's coming up next.
But first, a word from our friends from the FanDuel Sportsbook, and we are finally down to 4 in the college basketball tournament, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on all the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. $200 extra dollars to use on everything from buzzer beaters, Cinderella stories. There's none of those left, guys. We're all 1 seeds at this rate, all 1 seeds, which means there's going to be we have 3 excellent games of college basketball left this season. So this is a great way for you to get on the action. And if you don't have a rooting interest, you could pick one up if you use the FanDuel Sportsbook. So you go ahead and take a look at that right now. Once again, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Best of all, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid out instantly with no waiting around. So head to FanDuel.com today and get in on the college hoops action until they blow the confetti in San Antonio. FanDuel.com today.
Okay, segment 2 of this Monday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Mitch Sherman, Connor Happer with you. It was a good weekend if you're a front runner, Connor, in college basketball at least. As you said, 4 1 seeds. Who had that? Just pick the 1 seeds, just pick the favorites, and you're sitting pretty in the bracket competition.
Yeah, I saw a couple people like touting, like, I'm in the 97th percentile of a bracket challenge. Just like, okay, so you're chalk, like I'm not
something to brag about if you picked every team in the Final Four at this point. It's like, so like
I'm
you
not
pick
impressed.
the teams with the 1 next to them. I'm not impressed about that. My final is Florida and Duke. I say as I talk about not being impressed with people who picked the top seeds, but those were the only 2 that I hit in the Final Four. I'm still alive, not to win the pool, but to pick the champion and pick the championship game correctly.
It's worth something.
One favorite that did not win this weekend was Oregon State baseball, number 5 ranked in the country. The Beavers came into Haymarket Park conference-less and lost 2 of 3 against Nebraska, which is 2-7 in the Big Ten. Huskers scored 16 runs on Sunday to win the series after a 7-3 victory on Friday. So, nice weekend for Will Bolt's team. They will play Creighton on Tuesday night at Haymarket Park in the first of 3 between the Jays and the Huskers this season. The forecast for that one, the weather forecast, is not ideal. We're talking like 50s. It will be windy as usual in the Haymarket area. And then the Huskers are at Omaha on Wednesday, another day that doesn't look all that warm early in April. Rutgers in Lincoln this weekend. So maybe definitely some positive momentum for Nebraska baseball. Is it going to be that, this situation where, and we've seen this before, Nebraska can rise up and look like, hey, look at our high potential, but we're going to then lose to Rutgers.
Yeah, that's a real thing. You could use it for yourself or not. They do seem to have their best against the best teams that they play. And then they don't have it.
LSU played well. Vanderbilt, they beat. Yeah. That's not like what you necessarily want to be known for.
I don't think so either.
But you'd rather do this than lose that series against Oregon State, which is a College World Series contender this year. So, all right, let's move on. Dylan Raiola, the Nebraska quarterback, had some thoughts also on Thursday in meeting with the media. Let's go through that just a bit. I was interested to hear Dylan talk about his wide receivers, and Nebraska has added 3 from the transfer portal: Dane Key, Hardley Gilmore, Nizia Hunter coming in from power programs. That's added to the mix with Ja'Cory Barney, Cortez Mills, the new addition from Miami. He and Barney are close. We heard from Ja'Cory Barney. Also, don't forget about Isaiah Mosey. We saw him on some practice video that came out from Thursday. I don't believe this was from the open portion of practice. It may have been, but it's not something that I noticed watching in person. But he stood out. Mosey did in running some routes and catching. It was a ball that he caught from Raiola that looked pretty nice. So he's perhaps a receiver who's going to factor into things. Quinn Clark is a guy that Matt Rule tweeted about over the weekend for having a good moment at practice on Saturday. Raiola likened himself as a quarterback to being a car guy, a quote car guy who's got a Lamborghini and a Ferrari in the garage. So I think Dylan is genuine in the way that he feels about these receivers. Like, he's not such a great actor that he can just stand up there and say things about his receiving core and be saying it just to say it, like to be a good company guy. Like, I legitimately think that he likes very much what he has at the pass catching positions this year.
I think like things are different for Dylan now, and that's the whole thing with the conversation on him this spring. You know, he speaks for the team now, and he answers questions about, like, you know, team wide stuff, other positions, you know, expectations, things like that. So things are different for Dylan now. But if you asked him this, you know, a year ago, leading into his first season, about his wide receivers and, you know, how does he feel about the group, he would have said he loved them, you know, and there was all the reason to, with a appropriate, you know, mix of production in college and potential that those guys had. So yeah, I think there is absolutely still that. And there's probably a little, you know, a better chance of somebody to really break out this year because there's just more available, you know, like sports car looking guys, I guess, in the room. But yeah, there's no doubt about it. They have some really athletic guys in there. It's just, can you get them going?
Here's an observation, and I've seen some other postings around the country with spring practice underway all over the place, and especially if you're in an SEC or a Big Ten program, I throw the Big 12 into this too. You really like the look of your wide receivers. Like what? I don't know that there's a school out there that thinks, we may not be good at the wide receiver spot. It's like, it's in practice in the spring. I don't want to say it's easy, but I think it's very common for teams to think, yeah, we really have it together. We are stacked at wide receiver because it's a position that's featured in it attracts the best athletes. Like, that's football today. There are great receivers, great looking receivers, I should say, all over the place. So we probably thought this last year. We've thought it in other years about Nebraska. I think just about every big school out there thinks that they have quite the cast at the wide receiver spot because you line them up and they absolutely look like it. So there's a fine line between that and then going out and really producing. Like, it's all relative. If everybody has great wide receivers, then like you can't be at the top. Everybody can't be at the top, like in the top 10%.
Yeah.
You have to go out and do it in the fall, obviously.
I tell you what, too, the conference has had some absolute stud wide receivers.
Yeah, they're all over the place. I mean, look at like what Minnesota's had, like Illinois. I mean, Purdue. Obviously, we know about Ohio State and Michigan putting out great wide receivers. Penn State, it goes without saying, but they're all over the place in the Big Ten and the SEC as well.
Yep. So Nebraska's goal is to look a little bit more like them. When we come back and finish things out here on a Monday, let's talk about the storyline going on with Dylan Raiola. You said body composition earlier. I think that is a catch-all term, but you get to hear it from Dylan's mouth this time. How has this transformation been for him? We'll talk about that after this.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, welcome back. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you here on a Monday. Dylan Raiola and the body composition. It's a topic that has grown and grown and grown. The coach, says the number's 240. And you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And people see Dylan Raiola at a basketball game, and they're like, what's going on here? And then he shows up to practice and pro day, and we're like, wow, Dylan looks pretty good. And he's responded and had an off season that is made him, he's trimmed down. There's no doubt about it. He looks like he's distributed that weight better.
I didn't have this on my bingo card, Connor, as the storyline that was going to capture Nebraska fans and college football fans when it came to the Huskers' second-year quarterback in his offseason here. But this is what's done it, and Dylan's in tune with that, like he usually is with most things. He wasn't surprised, clearly. He had an answer ready. Wasn't surprised to get asked about this on Thursday at his media availability. And he even mentioned, like, I don't have a problem talking about this. You'll hear that in the clip that we're going to play here from Dylan. He was asked just about the challenge in going about meeting the goals that Matt Rule and others have set for him in getting in the best shape that he possibly can. And this was his answer.
Honest, it sucks. I'm just be honest, like, you know, it's a constant grind every day. Sometimes you don't see change right away. In this instant, you know, physical body standpoint doesn't change in a day, doesn't change in a week, doesn't change in 2 weeks, not even 3. So it's just the consistency of staying on it and keep going. And you know, I'm just grateful for, you know, our strength staff, our nutrition staff, even my dad. My dad's been involved heavily as well. So it's been a team effort. I'm grateful. I feel amazing right now. Probably the best shape I've ever been in. Yeah, no, I feel great. You know, I went on spring break, came back probably about 9 or 10 pounds lighter. So, you know, that was an emphasis. You know, kind of getting away from the program and you know, just always the soreness and, you know, just all the lifting we do here, which is great. But kind of just to, you know, take that step. You know, like I said, it doesn't happen in 4 weeks. You know, that was probably week 6 or 7. And it kind of all of a sudden snapped, and here we are. It's perfect time, you know, right in the spring ball.
Running or cardio, or what'd you do over spring break to break through like that?
Yeah, I mean, I boxed every day, 6 a.m. in the winter, and then I would go right into a mile after we lifted, and then I'd come back later in the day and do 20 more minutes. So that was the winter, and then spring break, I just lifted in the morning, and then at night, I would get a, you know, cardio session, and then I would jump in the sauna. So I don't know, it's kind of like boxing training for some reason, but I feel great. I think they correlate great together. You know, the jump ropes and the foot strike and all those things. So I mean, yeah, I'm cool talking about it. I'm happy where I'm at right now.
What was he saying there at the end?
The kickboxing thing is really this really worked for a lot of people. This is a proven method at this point.
I think a lot of more people can identify with Dylan who are outside of the football program than those who are alongside him in the football program. But this makes him real. I think it helps make him real. You know, we don't all have NIL and rev share deals like Dylan does, but like I appreciate what he's talking about when you're like, man, I'm working at this. I got these goals. I'm working at it. And like a week goes by and 2 weeks goes by and 3 weeks goes by. And you're like, what's happening? When is the payoff? And for Dylan, it came interestingly when he kind of got away from the routine of everything that he was doing to work so hard at Nebraska. And he went home for spring break and he continued to put in work. It's not like the coaches mentioned, Holgorsen mentioned that when spring break came about and the players were getting ready to disperse, they were like, what are you doing for spring break, Dylan? And he's like, I'm going to go home and continue working on getting in shape. And you know, whether it's 5 pounds or 10 pounds, whatever it was, he came back and he broke through. You heard the short question there in the middle. It was to the point, not long and belabored.
Nice, Mitch.
Yeah.
Well done. That's how you take. That's you watch the tape, you grind the tape, and then you learn, and you're better because of it on the other side. We love to see that growth. But yeah, he is. I mean, I don't find it surprising. Like, that's a really good window into something that we don't talk about in football enough, which is how difficult it is to either keep weight or lose weight or manipulate your weight, especially during the football season when, like you said, there's lifting and you're sore and there's there's all these other football related activities that just, you know, you have to eat all of the time. Right. So for him to get out of that structure and probably simply just not eat as much for a week obviously helped him. I imagine that was a huge part of it.
Yeah. Or just a change in routine. The change in routine, like, kind of shocked his body a little bit. You know, it's funny, like the higher level of football you get to, and if you got to the NFL and you talk to a 53-man roster, other than the offensive linemen, you're going to find far more players who struggle with keeping on weight and than the opposite.
Yep.
So, and I think for most people, every time that comes up, when a linebacker's like, man, I'm just trying to stay at 215. It's hard. We work so hard. And, it's like, okay, yeah, it's hard to identify with those people, I think, for the public. But with Dylan, I think there's a lot of people out there who can go, yeah, been there.
All right, coming up this week at practice, we'll hear from John Butler, new defensive coordinator John Butler, and a couple players on Tuesday. Glenn Thomas is going to make an appearance, I believe, as well. I haven't seen him around I haven't heard from him in a while.
He's still around, yeah.
Yeah, he's still around because you can have infinity coaches. That's right. And Donovan Raiola, Dylan's uncle, AKA the offensive line coach, and a couple players on Thursday. And then Rule will kind of update us as you'll be at the about halfway point of spring ball after this week. So should be another big week on tap, but we'll get away from talking about Dylan kickboxing this week, I think.
I mean, maybe Donnie's been in there kickboxing with him and giving him some instruction. I'm sure a question will come up. Well, and with Glenn Thomas, like Thursday is liable to be more Dylan conversation with the duo that they have going there, the QB's coach and the O-line coach. I'm interested on Tuesday to hear from Butler because we haven't talked to him since this defensive staff has come together. And it's such an interesting mix on the defensive side because of Phil Snow's presence, because of the new guys, Williams in the secondary, Braden, the D-line coach, Simpson, who has not worked with John Butler before the last couple of months. So he's got Dvorak back in the same spot, and then everything else is just like there's a lot of newness on the defensive side. So I'm getting more bullish on this defense. Like I'm going through this metamorphosis right now here in the spring. It usually takes several months. So like a month by month process before you get to July, and you're like frothing at the mouth over the potential of the team in general. It's like as we hear from a few players and get to see some video, and like the one that I mentioned earlier when they put out, and again, like social media, it's propaganda. Like there could be 100 plays that go poorly and like two that go well, and those are the two you're going to see on social media. But you get sucked in by it, and like seeing Javen Wright, who's a wild card, and like that's confirmation right there because they were in full pads on Saturday. So that's confirmation right there that Javen Wright, as opposed to what he was doing in the fall, is out there in contact drills. Yeah. And Amari Sanders is somebody we probably don't talk about enough in the secondary. So I'm like it's kind of it's intriguing to me to think about like the first 11 or like 11 to 14 who are going to play on the defensive side, and I'm excited to hear from John Butler about it.
Yep, more clues on that this week. Appreciate y'all making Locked On Nebraska your first listen for today. For your second listen, you can check out Locked On College Basketball as they get you ready for the Final Four, and you could be the most informed college basketball fan right now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.